I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1865 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. In this episode, we have a very, very special guest, none other than John Shoemaker, who has been on this podcast on 16 different occasions, and he has done a tremendous job in explaining life in an infantry platoon in Vietnam. He served in the 196th Infantry Brigade up in the Americal Division and I Corps in the Badlands of northern South Vietnam. And he served his whole tour in the 196th Brigade. And in the 16 episodes that he has been on this podcast, he has told us some very interesting things about life in the trenches over there in Vietnam. On this episode, he's going to wind it up with lessons learned. He's got some very, very important things to tell you about what he learned about life in the foxholes and the trenches and the bunkers over there in Vietnam. And if you listen very carefully, I'll guarantee you, if you follow the things that he tells you in your own life, you will do better in life and have a better life. So, John, first of all, thank you so much for your contributions to this podcast, and thank you for coming on here to tell us your lessons learned from your time in Vietnam.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, Mac. Would hope that these comments not only would be interesting for veterans and for active personnel, but also for those who are trying to move through life, making positive progress and avoiding many of the pitfalls that afflict all of us at some point. So I stand here today at 74 years of age, having been in Vietnam and having spent 4 years in the Army, and then the rest of my career, 45 years in high technology. I can honestly say that I sit here feeling comfortable with myself. I sleep well. I really don't have regrets. I've certainly made mistakes, but none of them were deliberately done in a negative way. It just turned out they were mistakes in judgment. But overall, I think that some of the key things that have made life more successful for me as a person and what I expected out of life revolved around things like, and I know it sounds mundane, but honesty, habits, education, and challenge. I mean, that's what I think does shape us as we move through life. From the time that we're in elementary school, through high school, through college, through your career, marriage, divorce, everything. So to move beyond that, I would say that life is a gift. This is something that we all need to understand, and that we're here for such a short time. I look back and I cannot believe how fast my life has gone. And it gets faster. It speeds up after you reach 60. I believe that in my heart. But life is not just about luck. It really is about deliberate actions that we can take. Now, when it came to college in the 1960s, a most tumultuous time. If you think it's crazy these days, it was actually in many ways crazier back in the late 60s. When I graduated from high school in 64 and college in 68, believe me, if you know about history, there was so much conflict going on, it was outrageous. I really was worried about whether the country could even hold itself together. But the concern was Vietnam. It was everywhere. It was like the pandemic. You didn't do anything any day without thinking about Vietnam. I decided to face it head on and say, look, I'll enlist. I think I can learn and I can help. And I'll face that challenge straight ahead and see if I can learn and move beyond it. So I enlisted, and I signed up for every school I could get into, and I sought all the training I could. So before I even went to Vietnam, I spent 2 years, 24/7 in training, in preparation for Vietnam. So when in Vietnam, the realization hits you that this is no longer on Walter Cronkite. You're not watching it on TV anymore, on the news, and 500 casualties a week for months and years. It was just incredible. But here you are, you're there. And the first thing they do is they put you through training and to learn the local tactics and the enemy's movements and weapons and so forth. But in that, I have to say, I've worked with West Pointers, I've worked with officers, I've worked with many sergeants, experienced and not. But the thing that separates, I think, a lot of them is, frankly, not necessarily how strong they are and how much weight they can lift, how big they might be, their pedigree, where they came from, how their intellectual capacity is so superior. In many ways, on a battlefield, none of that really comes to play as much as simple common sense. Common sense, understanding what makes simple common sense, keeping things simple, thinking things through without making it so complicated that you get frozen, you get paralyzed, and being able to act clearly and decisively. I don't necessarily believe in fate. I know there's a lot of poems and songs and so forth singing about fate, but fate is, to me, what happens when you resign to outside forces. That if you can anticipate, you can craft your own path through life. Part of that path must include having effective relationships. And in the Army and in combat, clearly relationships is critical. In order to have an effective platoon, you need effective leadership, and that really needs to have effective relationships with each member of the platoon. They need to know that you care about them, that you care what's happening in their world, and that you're there to help them learn. And it might be tough love, but you need to be all over them to make sure that you're helping them help you and help the whole platoon. Truth is critical because that shapes their trust in you as the leader. Beyond relationships comes, in my mind, discipline. Discipline, discipline, discipline. I can't say enough about it. Discipline to me means doing the things that other people don't like to do, and you do it routinely. You have developed a habit that will reinforce the things you've been taught to do it without always making exceptions or excuses. Discipline comes or creates self-confidence. And I say later on, self-confidence, is affected by how calm you are. And you can be calm when you understand the situation. That does create confidence. When people see that you're confident, that encourages their courage. Calmness creates confidence that encourages courage. Another area of critical importance in my mind about Army, combat, life in general, are the personal habits of integrity. Developing those habits that support your personal values, that drives your character. And that covers everything from what you think about and what you do for your own personal health. And you might say, oh, come on, that sounds pretty, mundane, simple. But why is it that people smoke today? Why is it that people drink alcohol to the point of extreme? Why is it that people have the most terrible habits that are self-destructive. So you can say that, values and character and health is mundane, but it's not practiced, unfortunately, by too many people. Why do we have such obesity in this country? So that when something like a pandemic comes along, who are the ones that are most vulnerable? It's the ones who have not shown personal habits to be healthy and to do the right things so that the pandemic won't affect them. I think that is a clear example of preparing for life, maintaining the discipline through life, doing the things that will keep you safe. Beyond that, it comes the whole subject area, and boy, you can go to a library and you can see thousands of books on leadership. What does leadership mean? How is it practiced? All the examples and so forth. One quote I will use is from Napoleon, who said, "Leaders are dealers in hope." Well, the fact is, soldiers want to know that their leadership knows what to do, has their interests at heart, and can help them survive while succeeding. Leadership, to me, is also about earning trust. If you don't have trust, you are not going to be successful, period. Soldiers want to know that you can show them the way, that you have to demonstrate confidence, and again, you have to be fearless. You have to have that courage. If you have the confidence, and if you're calmly aware of the situation, then you can expect courage to flow from that. The other part of trust is truth. If you lie or if you exaggerate or if you distort, it kills your credibility. Credibility is everything for leadership on the battlefield or in the office. As a lieutenant, as I said, I sought all the training that I possibly could get. That included not only basic and advanced infantry training and airborne school, understanding how to control your fears in jumping out of an airplane is a great way to understand how to stay calm, how to control your emotions in what would normally be a critical, devastating, or overwhelming situation. OCS, training school, then jungle school in Panama, then in-country training in Vietnam, and then finally facing the enemy. When I reported for duty, a leadership persona is something that you recognize right away. I remember reporting to a first lieutenant who had a battlefield commission. He was a master sergeant. He had a couple of tours in Vietnam. He was a leader. You felt it. Just watching him, listening to him, you knew he had his act together. He had his act together. And that was so inspiring, so good to feel. So that persona, that bearing, leadership bearing, is something you need to understand, and you can see it, you can feel it, not necessarily always easy to invent, but it is a critical aspect of leadership. But the basic skills that you need in infantry, certainly in Vietnam, now things have changed. Obviously, the tactics and weaponry and the vehicles and all of that sort of thing has changed quite a bit. But there are some basic things that doesn't matter. In any wartime situation, when you get down to it's an individual soldier with a rifle trying to survive against an enemy trying to kill him. Skills for a lieutenant, first and foremost, for me, the most important thing was the map, land navigation, knowing where I was at all times. So the map, land navigation, is critical, not only knowing where you are and where you need to go, but where you are when the shit hits the fan, when you make contact, being able to report exactly where you are so that artillery or airstrikes or Cobra gunships coming in, they know where you are based upon your coordinates. Now, things are made a little easier these days with digital or electronic devices for mapping and positioning, but when they fail, and they can fail, or they're destroyed, or they're lost, or the batteries die out, or whatever, you still need to be able to develop that skill of knowing where you are at all times. For me, the ultimate was being able to take a company, lead them through 6-7 hours of marching through the jungles and in the mountains and in triple canopy where there were no benchmarks, and knowing where you were, and then arriving at exactly the point to hook up with another unit without getting lost. Well, at that point, I had Kit Carson scouts who only wanted to travel with my platoon because they felt like at least I knew how to read a map, know where I was all the time. And they felt more comfortable that they wouldn't get lost. Communications, being able to use that radio during times of stress to call in artillery or fire support. That was critical. The thing about any kind of electronic devices or radios in the case of Vietnam, batteries, understanding, do you have enough batteries? Having a weak link in everything you do includes, in my mind, having the batteries and electronic devices that can work even when things start to fail, the fog of war, so to speak. Field experience, and that's an area that most people don't talk about, but to me was extremely important and was particularly helpful when we set up what we called Mike Alphas, mechanical ambushes. Mike Alphas were basically putting a tripwire across a trail and using a plastic spoon and a clothespin and setting up a claymore mine so that if somebody walked across that trail that was the enemy, that was the last time that they would see the light of day. So field expediency is adapting to the situations on the ground or in the situation to add that advantage that you have over your competition in business or the enemy in combat. Speaking of situational awareness, understanding what's happening to you, where you are, what you're supposed to do, who you have with you, and being aware of what's going on, being alert, which means that will drive anticipation. Now, if there's one word that I would want you to remember out of all of this, it's anticipation. I spent every moment, it seemed, in my time in Vietnam for 12 months. I was always in the cycling mode of anticipation. Okay, here I am now. Here's where the platoon is, or here's me as an individual. If we get ambushed, what do I do? What tree do I get behind? How do I move that second squad? How would I respond to what's in front of us? We're in jungle. We're in a mountain. We're in a rice paddy. I'm always anticipating something to go wrong, something that will catch us by surprise. And my mind was always constantly running through anticipating. Even now, when I do hiking in the mountains of these national parks, which I love to do, I'm always anticipating, what if something goes wrong? A storm comes in, lightning strikes, I lose one of my buddies, they break their leg or break an ankle. Or I had one case, we were climbing a 14er, and he got this guy who was a marathon runner, but in Boston. And then he comes out to Denver, and then he said, I'm going to just run up this mountain. And he left us behind. And he got to the top. There was no problem. He got up there real fast. He was lightning fast. Unfortunately, he then vomited his guts out and could hardly walk down. We had to actually carry him down the mountain. So it's understanding what to do in situations where it goes against the plan. I've talked a lot about anticipation. The other is preparation. What soldier should be carrying what weapon? And do they have enough ammo for the mission or the patrol that you're going out on? I always felt you couldn't carry enough ammo. At the same time, you don't want to carry so much that everybody's bogged down, but that's where judgment comes in. But there's other things besides the obvious. An M79 or an M60, and who's carrying the belts and that sort of thing. How many belts should you carry, period. But things like flares, water, malaria tablets, the iodine tablets for the water. I mean, there's a laundry list, a checklist of things that you constantly need to check. And soldiers don't necessarily think of this as much as the leader. The leader has to be filling in the gaps so that you don't get vulnerable. Okay, worst case. What happens in a worst case scenario? What is the leader going to do? Whether it's you've just hit a booby trap or a IED, place blows up, people are screaming, what are you going to do? How fast are you going to do it? Where do you go? How do you position your troops? All of those things you need to have practiced, and you run through your mind as you become situationally aware of the environment as you move through the territory. In my case, there was a situation where the Hueys had dropped off my platoon in a cornfield. We rushed into the wood line. We kind of all got down. I told everybody just to sit, be quiet. As I got my binoculars out and I checked, and sure enough, I found the enemy was forming on a hillside on the other side of this cornfield in the middle of nowhere, near the ocean border. The point there is, fortunately, I brought marking panels so I could put out on some bushes so that the Hueys could see where I was located, where I wouldn't have to pop smoke, because then the enemy would know where I was, right? So I gave my coordinates. I had the marker panels, and sure enough, the Cobra gunships could see that, and they knew exactly where they had to go. As I told them, look, 200 meters from my position going northwest is where the enemy is set up on the hill. And they went right there, and it was an awesome display of firepower and competence. Okay, well, I guess I would finish these, this overview of all of the characteristics that will help you survive in business, in life, certainly on the battlefield. I would say, in the end, having a sense of calmness with your awareness of what's going on, situational awareness, that will create confidence, that will encourage courage, and encourage the followers to listen and to want to implement the plans that you've outlined. That makes competence scream loud and reflects on you as the leader.
Would it be safe to sum up what you're saying is, when it falls apart, it doesn't matter if you're on the battlefield in Vietnam or in the boardroom or on the sales team force, when things begin to fall apart, stay calm.
Yes, staying calm and basically then relying on the collective knowledge and skill of your team. And a leader does not always have to have all the answers. As a matter of fact, that's never going to happen. So leaders, whether in, again, the boardroom, on the sales team, or on a platoon or a company in combat, the leaders don't always have all the answers. They have plans, okay? They have tactics and they have strategies. But in the real world of combat, we all have heard the fog of war. Once you make contact, everything changes. There you need to have reliance on your team to help feed their perspective to you so that you can incorporate their input and create an ongoing, modified plan that addresses the situation as it unfolds. So again, leaders don't have to have all the answers, but they do have to have good listening skills, and they have to encourage that kind of feedback. Now, in combat, clearly when the bullets start flying, it's all about action, right? So you do need to act quickly. Hopefully some of that is a result of training. When the contact stops, now what to do and how to prepare for the next time when contact is made with the enemy. Or in the case of sales, it's what do we do the next time we get a prospect? What did we learn from the last time that we can incorporate those lessons learned so that we don't make the same mistake, or that we capitalize on those lessons learned that really work to your advantage?
That is an amazing statement you've made here about leadership and how you get things done. And I just have to say, what you have just said to us about all these things would be very appropriate for an Army War College classroom or a Zig Ziglar sales convention, because the things you tell us, they apply to wherever you are, combat, civilian pursuits, or whatever. If you follow those leadership techniques and characteristics, you're going to do well.
you can read a lot of this in books. As I said, in libraries and in bookstores, there's mountains of books on the subjects of leadership and tactics and strategy and so forth. But all of that you must distill down to the fact that you're never going to know everything. And I don't care how many books you read, you can't have it all immediately on your brain, and you can search through the files in your brain to get the right answer. So you need to look at these situations, consider your judgment, ask for input from those on your team. And whatever endeavor in life, certainly for me it was on the battlefield that I learned to trust your soldiers, that they have self-interest as well, not only in their survival, but in the team's survival. In that case, the last thing you want to be is out in the middle of enemy Indian country, as we call it. He might survive, but if he sees everybody else doesn't, what good does that do for him? So everybody has a self-interest. They all want to succeed. And I think that's the attitude that business leaders must have, which is people want to succeed. They want to work. They want to do a good job. They don't want to fail. And if they do, because of some issue that you're not aware of, then that's a leader's problem. He must find out the reason, whether it's divorce, whether it's he's on drugs, whether he has some other completely irrelevant problem to the business at hand. That will definitely hurt the team. That needs to be resolved. But when you take that away, people want to succeed. And your role as the leader is to provide that environment, that feeling of joint success, that everyone will succeed with this leader who has his act together. He has an interest in the workers, as well as he will have to show, tough love at times to keep everybody on track. There's nothing wrong with that. At the same time, the goal is important. Whether in combat, the goal is this patrol, we want to go out, we want to find the enemy, we want to kill the enemy, and we want to come back all in one piece. That's the goal. The goal is to survive. But to also win a war, you need to accomplish that against the enemy with everything that they've been taught. So all the training needs now to be put into practice. You just don't forget it. It's really what it comes down to.
Again, like you say, that applies to whatever pursuits you are going after, military, civilian, or whatever. And, I was thinking, John, after listening to you, all I can say about what you've told us today is that it is some good stuff. And I would advise anybody who listened to this episode to carefully consider what John has said and use those points that he laid out to you. If you do, I'll guarantee you're going to have a better life. So, John, I appreciate so much you coming on to tell us about this, and I hope it won't be the last time you come on this podcast. So thank you very much. We greatly appreciate it.
Well, Mac, thank you. I salute you, and I salute all veterans, and I certainly wish America will continue its progress as we are the best country. We are the country that has established values. We have characteristics that have made us so different in all the course of humanity that we have the ability to be free in search of liberty, justice, and the pursuit of happiness in our own way. And I think that America is with a history that must be preserved, as that is the window to our future.
Hear, hear, John Shoemaker. I agree with that 100%, and I hope everybody else does. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you, Mac.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?